Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Type 10 Competitor, a science fiction horror novel that reaches for the stars but is grounded in the real-life experiences of the author. Taylor Lee dreamt of telling the story while living on a Georgia farm against his will. His then friend and benefactor lured him to the farm with the promises of a better life, but quickly went to work manipulating Taylor into severe seclusion, isolated geographically, socially, and financially. The author had to rely on his tenacity and willpower to survive the onslaught of psychological and emotional abuse. He had to steal milk and potatoes because he wasn't paid to buy food, and was told nobody back home loved or wanted him, so he wouldn't want to leave the farm. If you like stories about isolation, near murder, betrayal, or the grinding pursuit of freedom, click the link at the top of the description to find out more. It could be the perfect last-minute Christmas gift as an ebook for someone you love. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mother died when I was 9 in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. Me and my older sister Karen moved in with my father, and my 2 younger sisters moved in with my stepfather. I want to start this by saying I truly don't believe it's my mother that's doing the haunting, and that this has all been caused by my own stupidity. But now, I don't know what to do. When I was a senior in high school, we moved into a tiny 3-bedroom house. It had a creepy basement with no outside entrance, but on the outside of the door was a chain lock, right about the doorknob, which made no sense. Right off the basement door was the back porch, where you would head through to get to my bedroom, and then you walk through my bedroom to get into my sister's room. My cat, who was more obsessed with my sister than me, refused to go into my sister's room. She would hiss and freak out every time I tried to walk her towards the back of the house. Once, one of my friends brought over their dog, and I put my cat in my room for safekeeping. I went back in there 15 minutes later, after they left, and the whole room was a mess with her running around, and there was piss and poo everywhere. She had never done anything like that before. There was another time when I was laying in my room, and my sister was laying in hers, and the door between the rooms was slammed shut. She threw open the door and started yelling at me about shutting the room off. When she saw my face, she realized it hadn't been me. I slept on the couch, and she slept at her boyfriend's house, and basically moved in with him after that. In a moment of divine teenage stupidity, my friends and I decided to use a Ouija board. We only used it for a moment or two. We opened the board, started, and got freaked out because we felt like we were being watched. We closed it off and put it away. It wasn't even a week later that the basement door chain was ripped off and there were gouge marks on the door. A week after that, I went into my sister's room to grab something to take to her, as the room was covered in gnats. I couldn't find anything that would cause it. Family issues led to me moving in with my stepfather and little sisters right after. It was only a 2-bedroom house, so I slept in the basement, in a small nook, and my sister Penelope slept on the other side. I would often hear the sounds of footsteps stomping overhead, even if I was the only one home. I saw a shadowy figure standing at my dresser that would vanish after I turned the light on. One night after a bonfire, my friend stayed the night. I sat up in bed because something was standing at the entrance to my little nook. They were dark and I couldn't make out any features. I watched them for a few moments, but they didn't do anything, so I shook her awake. She asked who they were, and tried talking to them, but they didn't respond. So getting freaked out, she turned on the light, and the moment she did, they were gone. We walked upstairs to find out it was almost 4 a.m. and everyone was asleep. Needless to say, we slept on the couch that night, and I slept on it pretty often after that. Not long after graduating, I moved into an apartment with my now husband, Ben, and became pregnant. We would hear doors shutting, which isn't super strange because we lived in an apartment, so obviously you can hear your neighbours. Sometimes I could hear whistling at the back of the apartment, and at others I would hear my daughter giggle over the baby monitor when she was learning to talk, and sometimes referring to someone she called Nana. Once our burner turned on, and burnt breakfast leftovers that had been sitting in the pan. I know it wasn't us because we had breakfast at 7, and it was 11 a.m. by the time I realized something was burning, and it was turned up all the way. We bought a new house around the time my daughter turned 3, and everything was fine for 2 years. But I recently just had a new baby, and things have gotten weird again. The first thing I noticed was my first day home alone with the baby. I was sitting on the couch singing to her, and right above me I heard what sounded like stomping, or someone walking up or through my attic. Obviously there's no one up there, so I brushed it off as sleep deprivation. But now my daughter's 4 months old and sleeps way better through the night, so I know I'm not tired. I often hear the sound of doors shutting and toys going off when I'm the only one home with the baby. My dog always runs to check out the noise, so I know it's not just me hearing things. I've stepped outside to have the door shut randomly behind me when the girls are napping. We've had cups fall and break out the cabinet in the middle of the night. My husband works out of town a lot, so I'm alone at night with the girls and often get the feeling that I'm being watched. I sleep with a pocket knife next to my bed, as a family had their life ended the night I gave birth to my daughter 4 houses down. So it's not that crazy in my opinion. But what drove me to share this was that last night I woke up from a dead sleep because I heard my baby crying. It was followed by a soft "hello" and shushing noise, and my baby started to calm. I relaxed for a second, thinking my husband was taking care of it, but then I felt him shift behind me. I have never bolted out of bed and grabbed that knife so quickly in my life. I threw my door open and my dog was sitting outside the baby's room watching the door. The baby was still awake in her bedroom by herself, her cheeks wet from tears, but her pacifier was in her mouth and she was just looking around. She's 4 months. She can't put a pacifier back in her mouth after crying. I checked the house. It was all clear. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and spent it scrolling the internet to find out if anyone else has had this problem. No, my husband doesn't believe anything's happening. He doesn't believe in this kind of stuff. He thinks there must have been interference on the baby monitor. I still don't think it explains the pacifier, or the stomping, or the doors being shut. I just don't know what I should do. Whatever it is doesn't seem to know if it wants to burn my house down or nanny my kids. Or maybe it wants us gone from the picture to have the girls to itself. I don't know what to do, or what to think. I'm 26 now and this all started when I was 18. Any advice or help would be so amazing and I would be so grateful. I really, simply do not know what to do. When I was 5, the night before my father died, I had a dream about going over to his apartment with my mother. When we got to the building there were police cars and an ambulance. My mum was not talking to the police, but went up to my dad's apartment. When I went in, it was weird because my dad wasn't there, but on one of the door frames was a bungee cord, and that is all I remember from the dream. I knew when I woke up in the morning that my dad was dead. I wasn't surprised when anyone told me, and people thought I didn't understand. I cried about it, and has messed me up in ways, but I knew what had happened. For many years everyone just told me he had died, and not that he had taken his own life. Until I was around 10, then they told me the truth, and my sister confirmed that he had done it with a bungee cord. I've also had dreams many years ago about exact moments that I have had now at work, or about people I've met. It's kind of weird, but it also makes me think I'm going in the direction I'm supposed to. My best friend and I have been friends ever since I was about 5 or so, and the first time I came over to her house I noticed that her mum was very happy and carefree, also very nice. This story is about her. The layout of her house is important to the story. They have a screened-in porch, and besides it is an open porch with a deck and stairs. Down those stairs there's a small forest, and by small I mean you can see the homes on the other side in a driveway. Anyway, my friend's mum loved nighttime, especially in summer when she could go outside. We were very young at the time, and being the normal 7-year-old girls we were terrified of the dark. The monsters under the bed, the bogeymen that lived in your basement or under the stairs, all that stuff. We were very big on cuddly stuffed animals and nightlights. Her mum would always tell us we weren't afraid of the dark. We were afraid of what hid in it. Well, I think she may have changed her outlook on this since then. She had only recently told us this story when we were about 13. She hadn't told us at the time it happened, as we would have been far too young, and there was no reason just to scare us. A while back there was a solar eclipse, not the famous ones everyone talks about. It was going to happen in the early hours of the morning, like 3 a.m. My friend's mum went outside in her pajamas but didn't think to bring a flashlight, as she thought total darkness would just add to the experience. Well, she can't say it didn't, that's for sure. Right as the eclipse was about to turn everything completely black, she started hearing whispers from the woods. Very soft at first, and she couldn't make out what they were saying, possibly a foreign language. And then everything went dark. They got louder. Almost like 1,000 people were whispering all at once. She stood there frozen for a second, unsure what to do. So she did what any sensible person would do, ran for the house. Keep in mind it was still pitch black, so she couldn't see. The only thing she could do was hope she was going in the right direction. Just as she started running, she heard the whispers chasing her, and something started tugging at the end of her pajama pants, but never touching her skin, but trying to pull her back. She managed to escape, and the eclipse ended, and she was able to see well enough to find her way back to the house. However, when she went back into her room, she heard someone laughing with an Irish accent, and another man in the same accent talking in some drunken gibberish she couldn't understand. She went to sleep with my friend's dad. He had gotten kicked out of her room for snoring. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. The next morning she visited her friend across the street and asked if anything strange happened during the eclipse. Her friend described the exact same thing. My friend's mum has never been outside alone without a flashlight since. You know, I bet this time she's glad that the dark hid everything evil that was trying to lure her there. I moved into a new house over the winter. My first actual house I've owned on my own, so I was pretty stoked. And we had just had our second kid just a week before signing, so we were excited to get her room remodeled for her. Walls painted, floors redone, making this house ours. Of course, we set up the baby monitor first thing. At first, there were no issues. The baby didn't enjoy the room during the day. She'd stare at the walls as if she didn't like the pale purple paint. We painted them a nice orange that weekend. We also got a cat, and that's when things started getting weird. Bear in mind, the children's rooms are on the opposite end of the house. The cat and baby now had no problem with the room in the day. Our daughter was too young to do much other than be calm or fuss, but the cat was old enough to be a bit more expressive. All day she'd stare at the southeastern corner of the room. At night, she'd arch her back and hiss as if threatened. We'd start hearing faint noises like talking over the monitor at night, but never loud or clear enough to make out. I am nothing if not a logical man. That corner had an old dresser that was rescued from an old army hotel when it closed. Perhaps the cat could sense something or smell something it didn't like. There was also the entrance to the crawl space under that corner on the outside, so a lot of wires entered through there. Both children and small animals are sensitive to electromagnetic radiation, so I went under the house and removed about 100 feet of extraneous wiring from 2 previous owners of satellite TV and rewired that section of the house to eliminate possible interference and replace old wires with shielded cable. We also moved the dresser just in case. But the noises didn't stop. They grew more frequent. The cat refused to go into the room during the day. It would sit awake in the crib all night, body between the baby and the rest of the room, eyes locked to that corner, occasionally growling or hissing. We stopped letting our son have his radio on at night, in case we were hearing that. As we met our neighbors, we would ask if they had any small children, but none had baby monitors of their own. We installed an alarm system, and I took to keeping my favorite rifle loaded by the bed. Occasionally the alarm would claim our daughter's window would open, but no alarm would sound, and we'd find it secure when we checked. We ran out of explanations, and began letting our daughter sleep with us, so that she could get her rest. For lack of a better option, I continued the renovation. We finished the bathroom, started on the other rooms, but didn't do any more in the nursery. Out of morbid curiosity, we left the baby monitor on one night. The noises still happened, but the room was being unused. They sounded almost sad. After a week or so without any use of the room whatsoever, I was lying awake after a very long day at work, watching an episode of Bones, when, out of nowhere, as clear as day, I hear a woman's voice come over the monitor and calmly saying, "It's okay. I'm leaving now." The monitor clicked off, and we've had no problems since. I talked to my wife about it, and we recalled one phrase the owners said during the closing. They had their 3rd kid, and the house wasn't big enough anymore. We had noticed a fair amount of construction material they left behind. Well, we thought they had an addition. She said, looking at her husband, "But then there was that thing," and they never made much eye contact after that. So one night, maybe a month ago, I'm sitting in my bed scrolling through Reddit or something, when I hear my daughter babbling to herself. Now it's really late, like 1 or 2 in the morning, much later than she ever wakes up, unless something is wrong and she is sick or cutting a tooth or something. So I turn the picture on the monitor on and see her standing up in her crib, facing sort of diagonally away from the camera. I can see her hands in front of her, but only half her face. Now is a good time to mention we have been teaching her ASL since she's about 3 months old, and she's been responding and conversing in sign since about 10 months. I can see her signing things like nice and silly and fun, and oddly enough, no, I don't like, and bear. Of course, being the very good and loving mother I am, and really not wanting to deal with an overly sleepy baby in the morning, I get up to see what the heck she's doing. When I get to her room, she's still standing up and signing and babbling towards the far corner of the room. I ask her what she's doing and who she's talking to, and she signs saying, as best she can, friend, which she does with her whole hand and not just her index finger, and signs bear again. I tell her no, see, Bear, who is actually one of her stuffed toys, is in bed behind her, not in the corner of the room, but she giggles at me and says, silly, and mummy. I can see she's wide awake, so I sit down in the rocker next to her bed and try to figure out what woke her up, but all she will tell me is friend and bear, and occasionally duck down like she's hiding and making shh noises. I finally get fed up and ask her who friend bear is, and her response literally gave me chills, because she does not speak well yet, but managed to say very clearly and with the most serious face a 20-month-old can pull off, "No name, no name, shh." Well, now I am well and truly freaked out, so I tell her to ask No Name Friend Bear to go home because it's too late to play, and I did what any good loving mother would do. I gave her a pacifier, went back to my room, turned off the monitor entirely, and hid under the covers in my room, where a good, loving husband would protect me from nameless, invisible bears. A few years ago, my best friend died. We were on bad terms at the time. I didn't realize it at the time, but his disease had taken his mind. Apparently on his deathbed he was hallucinating and laughing and talking to me like I was in the room. About a year later, I had a dream he called me on the phone. It was so realistic. We were catching up on my past year and joking around, and I suddenly realized and asked, "Hey, wait, aren't you dead?" There was this loud screech on the phone and I woke up. I know I was dreaming, but it felt so real. When I turned 20 years old, I went into my bathroom. It was the middle of the day. I turned to look in the mirror, but felt my reflection turned its back. I was facing the mirror while looking at the back of my head. I was so confused and startled that I left and was afraid to look in the mirror for the remainder of the day. No psych history, no drugs, no alcohol, no explanation. Throughout my lifetime, I have heard 3 knocks on the door or wall. It's not a common occurrence, usually late at night or early in the morning. I'm wide awake when it happens. When I investigated, I found nothing, no clue. When I was in my early 20s, I was trying to sleep on the couch with my girlfriend at her parents' house. I was nowhere near tired. I had my eyes closed and had the overwhelming sensation someone was standing over me. It was intense. I figured it was one of her parents. When I turned my head and opened my eyes, there was this old woman who I'd never seen before. She looked about 80. My heart dropped and the old woman looked shocked as she ducked behind the couch. I sat up and reached over the couch to find nothing. I was camping with a buddy in the high Sierras by a lake. I was trying to sleep on bare ground with my head uphill. It was a bright full moon, so you could see without a flashlight. I had this faint, pulsing sensation starting at my head, moving down to my left and stop at my feet. Now it was intense. I was convinced nothing was there, but would sit up to look and put my mind at ease. I did, and there was a huge mule deer with a giant rack right at my feet. I screamed, and the deer stood on his hind legs and ran off. Freaked me out that something was actually there. I was a teen and bought a terrible used car from a guy whose wife up and left him. It was her car, uneventful sale. I drove home, and since it was late I went to bed and was going to clean the car and get it all set up in the morning. That night I dreamt that I was holding a baby, and I find myself in front of the car guy's house. I knock. He answers the door and I said, "I have to give you your baby back," and he's really happy and the dream just ends. Okay, weird, but my dreams are weird. So in the morning I'm cleaning the car and reach under the seat and find this really pretty brown glass bottle. I can't see what's inside it, and the top of it was like a permanent seal. All of a sudden I get this incredible, intense, overwhelming need to drive to the man's house. Like for some reason I'm having trouble breathing and the tears are just pouring out, and I have no idea why. Like I could have just called him, but I knew I had to go there right then and there. So I drove there, knock on the door and hand him the bottle and said I found this and I think it's important. He just bursts into tears and told me that these are the ashes of his baby son that died from SIDS a year before. They had split the ashes into 2 bottles, and I guess his ex left them in her car. I know. What the hell, right? I am so glad I brought them back, but I never had anything give me chills like this did. Danny appeared on our neighborhood street on November 2010. I was 10 years old, my brother was 8, and my other 2 friends were 9 and 12. We were riding our bikes up and down the street enjoying our last minutes of daylight when we spotted what appeared to be a black cloaked figure pacing back and forth across the road. At first it was hunched over and we thought it was an animal, but you could tell it was wearing a cloak by the way the fabric moved as it walked. We watched as a car passed by it. As soon as the car headlights touched it, the figure sprang to the side of the road and sat there in the darkness, stooping low to the ground, then resumed its pacing when the car was gone. We were both frightened and curious. I ran to tell my mum about the mysterious stranger, and she came out and looked down the road and told me she didn't see anything. This only made us more determined to find out what was going on. We hopped on our bikes and went to check it out. Kaylee, the oldest, went first, with us younger kids trailing behind her just in case it would start chasing us. I don't remember my thoughts as we approached it. I was more fascinated than scared. I didn't believe in ghosts and was counting on my older friend to protect us. When we were about 5 feet from it, we stopped. By now it had paused its relentless pacing and was standing silently in the middle of the road, watching us. It was a man, about 5'5", dressed in a floor-length black coat with a hood. The sleeves of the cloak were long and hid his hands, and his face was hidden in the darkness of the hood. He looked like the Grim Reaper without a scythe. At first, the thought crossed my mind that he was one of the neighbors. Halloween had been about a month ago, and what neighbor would be outside on a chilly November evening pacing across the road? And besides, there was something off about the man that you couldn't place. Something inhuman. He wasn't see-through like you would think a ghost would be. He was solid and appeared almost as real as a person. Except there was something about the way he stood silently in the road staring at us. Something in the way he moved that made it obvious that he wasn't a part of this world. Kaylee stepped forward. "Who are you?" she asked. The man did not reply, but his head shifted towards her slightly, and it was obvious he was aware of us. Then his whole body shifted, as if he were going to walk forwards, and Kaylee turned her bike around, screamed at us to run, and began pedaling away at top speed. I instantly fled back up the street towards home, too scared to notice if it was chasing us. Kaylee was a rational kid for her age. She never got scared of anything, but as she ran past me, I saw her look back at the man, and she had an expression of terror on her face. Once we reached home, we looked back to see if he had followed us, but it had vanished. We didn't go back outside that night and walked each other home. Years later, there are so many unanswered questions that me and my friends still discuss. Who was he? Where had he come from? Our neighborhood was surrounded by a forest and a metal fence, and there was only one entrance, and we had been playing in the street all day and hadn't seen any strangers pass through. Why wasn't my mum able to see it? We have nicknamed the encounter Danny, because when we talked about the incident, people think we're crazy if we say ghost or shadow man. Indeed, if I say myself had seen Danny alone, I would have written it off as my imagination. But the fact that 3 other people saw it at the same time, including Kaylee, who used to make fun of people who believed in the paranormal, is proof to me that we didn't make it up. At night, the memory of Danny and his cloak makes me shiver, and I lie awake thinking about how I'm probably one of the only people on the planet who knew 100% the supernatural is real, because we stood in front of it and spoke to something that was not only present in our reality but aware of us. I wish I had taken some proof, but it was 2010 and we were kids and didn't have cameras or iPhones. I'm not even sure if other people saw it. No other neighbors reported anything strange, and my mother still claims to this day that she saw nothing when she looked down that road. I have two other theories: that Danny might have been the angel of death, walking amongst the earth to claim lost souls, or perhaps a lost soul himself. Our neighbourhood, Long Branch, had been lawless up until 1918 and was famous for its cults and shady encounters, especially in the 70s, when people were in trouble with the law often and lived there in secrecy and isolation. After we saw Danny, a neighbour ended his life, and his body wasn't discovered until a week later, and another was brutally beaten and ended with a chair while he lay in a coma at a hospital bed. My guess is that someone messed with something they didn't understand, and as a result, Danny was left to wander the dark woods forever, cursing the neighbourhood with his presence. We haven't seen him since, although odd deaths continue to plague our old neighbourhood. For me, the supernatural is too real and too close, and not something that I ever want to experience again. Over the last 5 years, a lot of things have happened to change my understanding of the paranormal. As a child, I can remember some vague experiences but dismissed these recollections as merely the product of a childish imagination, spurred on by traumatic experiences of a very abusive and miserable childhood. I have often envied those who describe childhood as a time of innocence, and such, for they are blessed with the ignorance of the world that I was denied. I cannot remember ever feeling safe or even loved. I do, however, remember almost constantly feeling frightened and vulnerable. Maybe this is how my earliest memories are of having several vivid, lucid dreams, wherein I saw my recently deceased grandfather Jones. I do not remember him as a living person. I know nothing of sitting with him or seeing his face. Even now I do not know what he looked like. I only knew that in these dreams it was him. He was waving to me across a snow-covered landscape. It wasn't cold, but there were no features on the environment except our house and a garden surrounded by a small white picket fence. On the lawn, I was making a snowman. At some point I became aware of my grandfather waving to me from over the fence. He was happy to see me, and before I knew it, he had occupied the snowman. I loved that snowman, and we travelled around together. However, he eventually melted and the dream ended with me feeling sad that he was gone. On another night, I remember seeing the world from his eyes. I knew I was in the hospital briefly, surrounded by relatives who were all grieving, and I began to rise up from the bed and float up. Although I could see the people in the room, I remained invisible to them. Then the scene changed, and I was being buried. I was in the coffin and the dirt was being placed on top of me. I could hear and see people crying even though the dirt was covering me. I could still see everyone somehow. I then began to feel my spirit float up and out the grave. I remember feeling like Jesus Christ risen again. I held out my arms for either side of me and gestured warmly and lovingly to all those at the funeral. I wanted to tell them that I was okay and still here, even though I was dead. These were deep concepts for a 5-year-old to have. Death, resurrection, the soul. I suppose I must have learnt them from church, as I was made to attend regularly. My father would take his life when I was 7, and I would be with my younger sister when we found him by his neck in our bedroom. Our mother had realized that he had probably done this and decided to leave him for someone else to find. She realized that this would be us, but didn't care. Like I said, our childhood was abusive. This was just one of the average sort of things she would do to hurt us emotionally, physically, and mentally. Nowadays I call this a narcissistic personality disorder, but it would take years before anyone could dismiss her sadistic tendencies as part of schizophrenia. She herself would always attempt to get sympathy by claiming depression made her do what she did, but she has always gained pleasure from the suffering of others. Most people miss it, as it's typical of narcissists, but I can see it a mile away. I would go to live with my Aunt Maureen and Uncle Stuart. They would raise me. But a year or two later, after moving in with them, my uncle developed cancer. He was afraid of hospitals due to extensive surgeries he's received from injuries sustained during the Second World War, and had no pain relief as the cancer ravaged his body before ultimately ending him. Seeing a man go from a strong, powerful human being to a feeble and diseased body is a troubling experience at 10 years old. My Aunt Maureen also lost her closest sister during this time, so she became very depressed. She came to rely on me for constant support. No one else in the family would care for her, and I had to spend my 21st birthday staying and bathing her after one of her many accidents due to being unable to control her bowels or bladder. It's difficult when you're the only person who's willing to provide care for someone, but I did it because I loved and still love her without reserve, and I would do it all again. But I do wish I had help, as she developed severe dementia and then Alzheimer's, and as her mind turned to mush and she forgot everything in her life. Finally, I had to arrange a nursing home for her, as it was impossible to even fetch shopping without her letting herself out. She passed away in the nursing home 8 years after going in. My mother had managed to put herself in a position of carer for her, and despite me being her son and Aunt Maureen being my real mother, my biological mother made sure that Aunt Maureen was buried without me being told. The pain of this was indescribable. I cursed my mother for denying me a chance to say goodbye to my much-loved Aunt Maureen. I was living and working hundreds of miles away in London when Aunt Maureen passed. I had met my now long-term partner back then. We were dating and getting on very well, and we reached the point where Sandra would stay over with me, and she told me how she was psychic, as her mother was. Many months later, when I found out Aunt Maureen had passed, we were talking, and Sandra brought up an incident whereby she had woken up in the middle of the night to see an elderly lady standing beside the bed looking at me. When she woke, the apparition looked like Sandra, before looking back to me. She had a sad expression on her face, so she hid beneath the covers, and despite trying to wake me up without success, she eventually fell back asleep herself. The apparition Sandra described was the exact image of my Aunt Maureen. I never made the link that night, but it was around the time Aunt Maureen passed over. But the thing that clinched it for me was the description of the apparition being exactly like that of my beloved relative. The strange point was that I have no photographs of my Aunt Maureen, not one. I also never told Sandra anything about how my Aunt Maureen looked. Around this time, I would also wake up in the morning with the sensation of someone clutching my ankle gently. My foot would be out of the bed, which always freaks me out, so I never allow my foot to protrude from underneath the covers. Yet this happened 2 to 3 times. There was also my Nan, who I love dearly. She passed away a few years after Aunt Maureen. This other lady was the other angel in my life. I've had 3 so far: Aunt Maureen, my Nan, and Sandra. The fact that my Nan would be sensed around me after she passed. I could sense her hand in the small of my back, or nudging me when I was doing something bad. Due to losing them both so quickly, I fell back into my old habits of drug abuse. I started on crack and heroin, intravenous daily, several times daily at one point, and this would sometimes cause horrifying encounters with spirits. One time I was coming up, and I was sensing an angry spirit just around the corner of the door. I said out loud, "I think you're in my imagination, so I won't let myself be scared of you." With that, I saw my trainer be kicked across the floor and rolled several times before it finally came to a stop. After another few times with several witnesses, and no windows or doors to cause a draft, I had paperwork go flying up in the air as though blown by a strong gust. It happened a few weeks in a row, and got to the point where I could tell people, "Watch what happens when I do this," and it would occur. It always happened just as I took a hit, and wasn't scary as much as it was intriguing. Even now, when I think about it, I often wonder if I hallucinated it. However, unless you're unable to see straight, you know if you are likely to imagine something. I had one night when I was parked up in a car next to a field, and we were doing our thing, only for me to see some short dark-coloured imps run from the gate to the field underneath the car. I could see them peeking out at me. Every time I tried to look directly at them, it was as though either they ducked out the way or something prevented me from doing so. Around this time, the mood of the vehicle grew menacing and dark. We began to argue, and one of the guys in the car said he wanted to take his life. I have done research on this phenomenon since then, and apparently there are fairy or fae who can influence men in such a way. The defining moment for me was when they knocked against the wheel of the car as they were moving. I heard the thud and asked the other occupants if they had also heard the bang. They all said they had, but didn't understand what it was. These creatures seemed to move incredibly fast and flicker between locations rather than move as you or I would. I've had them appear in my home even though I moved many miles away. They sort of look around corners at you with an almost fun or mischievous intent. However, I don't think they're good for me. On another time, I swear that a spirit appeared at the kitchen door. It was a large French door, fully length, double glazed, and there were no lights on in the kitchen or outside. I was intending to get something from the kitchen, but I could see this shape and it was seriously scaring me, and I huddled on the floor while staring at it. It seemed to push against the glass before I pushed myself backwards enough to get out of the door. This was in Swindon, Wiltshire, an area known for crop circles and UFOs, as well as Stonehenge and Avebury. But there is something otherworldly around this area. I've never seen a ghost, but I've heard them once or twice. One time I was in Bradford city centre, and there was an abandoned factory or warehouse. I was there with another person, and he asked me, "Brace yourself and do not panic. But do you hear those noises?" I explained that indeed I could, but for some reason was not scared of the source of the noise. The sun was setting, and the light shone in sideways through the building. I looked at the source of the footsteps and could make out the faintest blur moving around. It was as though it was hiding from us, and it leapt into a pit in the floor. I could see the shape of the top of the head peeking out from the shadow at us. It was moving very fast, and I was more intrigued in the spirit. I felt a connection to it. It seemed frightened of us. This incident was in the mid-2019s. Another time, a few months later, towards the end of 2019, I was walking up a hill near where I live. There were some old stone steps off to one side, and as I stood waiting for the return of someone else, I could hear footsteps descending, even though I could see no one on the steps. The weather was damp and humid, with no breeze and a very overcast sky. It seems that these incidents have led me to research more of the paranormal. I was fascinated when I was a young man, and read many books like those by Arthur C. Clarke and his peers. But I had never experienced anything when I started my research. Indeed, I would lie awake at night praying for something to show itself. Probably not the wisest move, and maybe it's why I have had experiences later in life. I suspect I was being protected when I was young and foolish. I remember having another dream about an occult lord who would take away my power to experience the paranormal. I accepted because at the time I was seeing strange phantoms at night walking the house and shared with my family. One of them looked like a cousin from the Addams family, and me and my sister would scream when it looked at us. None of the adults could see it. Of course, they dismissed us as being naughty. The house was 340 years old after all. So if a place ever would be an ideal home for spirits, this was it. Anyway, thank you for listening to my ramblings. I think this is everything. The only other incident was that my mother was attacked by an occultist when she was a teenager. He performed black magic spells on her and her sister, plus their 2 friends, and it was a horrible incident. I sometimes wonder if this could have transferred to our lives, as we were her children. It would be nice to know that she wasn't just a sadistic and cruel person, and there is more to this world than any of us can ever know. Around 14 years ago, when I was around 10 and my sister 8, our parents split up, and my mum moved around 20 minutes away from my dad's house. My sister and I lived with my dad most of the time, but would go to my mum's on weekends and sometimes Tuesday nights. I just wanted to state that my dad was a very strong Christian and I was raised with his faith. We'd often discuss angels and demons and the like, and I'd always believed in them strongly and still do. My mum never really identified as religious, however. My mum lived with a lovely lady who was very welcoming, and they lived in a nice modern house with white tiles and marble benches, so it was in no way creepy or seemingly haunted. Despite this, I had a few experiences in this house that I wish to share now. My sister, mum and I all slept in her bedroom. I would sleep in bed with my mum and my sister on a mattress on the floor, at least until she made us swap due to my restlessness. One night I woke up for no apparent reason and started looking at the end of the bed where I saw my sister going through my mum's jewellery box, and I started to wonder for a while if it was one of those wakeful dreams or if it was actually my sister. When I was convinced it was actually her, I woke up my mum and told her my sister must be sleepwalking. I thought we might be able to have a bit of a chuckle about it. My mum awoke and told me there was no one there and my sister was still in bed. I was a bit stunned as I was certain I could see her there. The next experience was slightly more unnerving. I don't remember how close to the last experience this occurred, but on another night I awoke and again looked to the end of my bed. This time, instead of my sister, I saw a disheveled looking figure standing there silently facing me. It appeared to be a woman, but I couldn't see her face. The figure wore a tattered white dress or nightgown and had messy black hair. I just laid there and stared. I didn't move or speak. It just faced me silently. I don't remember anything after that, whether it finally vanished or if I passed out. The final experience I had in this house wasn't something I saw, but rather something I felt. I was in bed one night, still sleeping on the floor, and Mum was up watching TV across the hall. Quite suddenly I felt this presence of absolute terror and malice fill the room. I knew without a shadow of a doubt something was in the room with me, and it didn't want to be my friend. Doing what I thought was best, I prayed my hardest and eventually the feeling subsided. Rarely have I ever felt such an overwhelming negative feeling take hold of me for no reason at all, and then pass again, except in a couple of sleep paralysis experiences I've had. But that's a story for another time. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. Like I said at the start of the video, if you need a last minute Christmas gift and you know someone who might read books, this book might be perfect for them, so have a think about it. Link at the top of the description. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know via clicking down below or writing a comment or whatever. It's entirely up to you. I really hope you did. I thought tonight's stories were pretty good. If there's a story that you want to share with me, you can do so by clicking the link in the description or posting it on my Reddit or emailing it to me. Either one are fine. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think my voice is getting tired. My brain hurts. Alright then guys, as always a huge thanks to my incredible patrons and members whose names can be seen on screen. But I think I'm going to leave things there for now. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.